Good evening. My name is Latika Gupta. On behalf of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation, SSAF, and the Safdar Hashmi Memorial Trust, SEHMAT, I thank you all for joining us this evening to remember and to celebrate Vivan Sundaram, artist, activist, curator, organizer, institution, and community builder. People from the world of arts and culture, from left, activist, and civil society groups, and from academia are here today, from Delhi, other cities in India, and from abroad. Your presence here speaks of the warmth, respect, and admiration with which Vivan and his work, which cut across disciplinary categories and broke new ground since the 1960s, was regarded across the board. This evening, we will hear from Vivan's friends and collaborators, in person and via recorded and written messages. We thank you all for being here. Thanks also to SEHMAT, which Vivan co-founded, and we also express our gratitude to Babu Ishwar Prasad for editing Time Is On My Side, Vivan London 1968, that you saw earlier today. The fleeting archive has been made possible by Devika Daulat Singh, Babu Ishwar Prasad, Anuradha Kapoor, and Saurav Sil. Vivan, an assemblage of moving image works on his practice, has been put together by Avijit Mukul Kishore. And Shaina Anand, Ashok Sukumar, and Camp Bombay have done the installation of editorials and obituaries from India and across the world. We thank all of them. And Ashish Rajadaksha, none of this would have been possible without your support. To begin, I'd like to invite Prabhat Patnaik to the podium. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Patnaik.
To commemorate a friend without reifying him is extremely difficult. I shall try. Vivan and I belong roughly to the same age group. We came of age politically in the same country, which was Britain, around the same time, which was the latter half of the 1960s, and under the same circumstances, which was the worldwide upsurge of student radicalism following the American war in Vietnam, a radicalism which reached its climax in May 1968 in France, when students and young workers occupied factories across the entire country, bringing about a revolutionary situation. Vivan and I, we occasionally marched together, including in the famous Grosvenor Square demonstration against the Vietnam War. We had the same pet hates, the novelist Kingsley Amis and Bernard Levin, who supported the Americans during the war. We read the same political literature. We had the same icons. But oddly enough, in Britain, we never actually met. There was an occasion when we came close to meeting. That was in 1970, when I had gone to speak to a group, a room full of left students in SOAS on Indian political economy, and Vivan tells me that he was in the audience. We almost met, but we did not actually meet. We met finally when we both returned to India. I came to the JNU. There was an exhibition of Vivan's painting shortly after his mother's passing away. One of the paintings was on that theme, and when my wife and I went to see that exhibition, we asked a person who we thought was the attendant there, how could we meet the painter? And so the person gave a shy smile and said, "I am the painter." So that was the first time that we actually met. Subsequently, Vivan used to come quite frequently to the JNU campus. We met at the house of a common friend, Anil Bhatti. And of course, there was even talk of Vivan joining the JNU faculty in the School of Arts and Aesthetics. our then Vice Chancellor, G. Parthasarathi, had a painting of Vivan in his office. He was very fond of Vivan. He had a painting of Vivan in his office so that anybody who went to meet him would feast his eyes or her eyes on Vivan's painting. Nothing came of it because of the fact that GP's term got over. The emergency intervened, but nonetheless, Vivan had very close relationships with JNU. He used to bring all his exhibitions to JNU, including the one of drawings which he did immediately after the emergency. The persons who were involved in, or who were inspired by May 68, who have earned the nickname of being 68ers, among them, the Indians were in a certain position of advantage. Most of my English and French friends among the 68ers are people who, like all of us, really held the pro-Moscow communist parties as being beneath contempt. Many of us believed at that time, I now feel in retrospect wrongly, that the French Communist Party betrayed the May 68 revolutionary uprising. But therefore there was no question of having any links with those communist parties. Therefore most of my English and French friends of that period, they withdrew into academics or withdrew into journalism and maintained at best some tenuous links with small Trotskyist and Maoist groups. But in the process, they got detached from the people's movement, from the democratic movement, from the workers' movement. But with the Indian 68ers, matters were quite different, because here there had been a split in the Communist Party. So pro-Moscow Communist Party was a quite distinct entity, but there was the CPIM, which had come out of that united party and which thought for itself, which actually took a position independent of both Moscow and Beijing. So a lot of the Indian 68ers drifted into some kind of an association with the CPIM, and that includes Vivan as well. In two of the party congresses of the CPIM, the backdrop to the stage was provided by paintings by Vivan. And of course, that was a period after the emergency when there was an enormous upsurge of enthusiasm. The left had emerged as a major player on the Indian political scene, and everyone, therefore, was quite enthusiastic about what is going to happen. It was also a period in which people thought of major projects. And one such project, which Vivan was involved in, was a conference in Kasauli, to which a large number of practitioners of arts belonging broadly to the left really came. It was a memorable conference. I remember the conference where Anil Bhatti gave a paper on the debates on realism between Brecht and Lukács. It was a conference in which Gita was talking about leisure and Kitai, in which older people like Govind Pillai and Sudhi Pradhan, they were talking about the history of the progressive cultural movement in the country, in which Said Mirza made a striking statement that anybody who actually puts an audience in a closed, darkened cinema hall and bombards it with a narrative film is actually engaging in a fascist act. So it was really, it was quite remarkable. I mean, it really left a big impact on almost everybody who participated there. And the idea of the Journal of Arts and Ideas was born there. The journal became a reality. Unfortunately, it did not last very long, but the few issues that came out of the journal stand testimony both to the ferment of those times as well as to the potential that exists in the country for such a serious journal to exist. But of course, that enthusiasm for the left, that kind of upsurge of the left is something which subsided subsequently. But even so, Vivan's commitment to it remained. As a matter of fact, he was a trustee of the Sardar Hashmi Memorial Trust, and as a trustee, he did a lot of, he not just trustee, he was an activist, curated exhibitions for them, and therefore he was in the forefront, if you like, of the artistic resistance against neo-fascism that was really emerging around that time. Therefore, right till the end, Vivan remained committed to the left cause, committed as an activist. Now, there is a difference between Vivan and the other 68ers that I can actually think of. Namely, Vivan was not just a brilliant artist, not just a fighter against neo-fascism, but he was a staggeringly, astonishingly honest person. I mean, one tends to befriend people who are on the whole honest. But Vivan was not just on the whole honest, he was astonishingly honest. It was his honesty, in a sense, which actually landed him in prison in Britain, which we saw in the clip that was being shown beforehand. And also it is his honesty which actually remained with him throughout his life, and because of which, I also believe that some of his artistic turns, some of his artistic innovations, departures, giving up painting and going in for installation, were really also a reflection of this honesty. He didn't want to be caught in a world of commodity production. So it is this honesty, together with his brilliance, as well as his complete political commitment, which actually made him a completely inspiring figure among the group of 68ers that I know. Therefore, 68ers, alas, are now beginning to pass one by one. But Vivan's passing is particularly tragic because it really leaves the world much poorer because of these qualities that I have just talked about. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sher-Gil Hashmi, historian of Delhi and one of the founding trustees of Sehmat.
It's very difficult for me to speak about Vivan, and especially after Prabhat. 6 minutes is a time that I normally take to warm up. So what I'm going to do is to read. Please indulge me. One of the most touching responses that I received when I posted the news of Vivan's passing was from Pushpesh Pant, who wrote, "Remember him from his days of heights of Machu Picchu poster light paintings when he frequented JNU. It was sheer bliss to be young in that dawn. The emergency descended like a dark night, but Vivan persisted in piercing it with light. There were some things in Vivan that did not change in the 50-odd years that I knew him, and these included his uncompromising stand against imperialism, authoritarianism, and communalism, his consistent support to the cause of socialism, his resistance to commodification of art, and his persistent efforts to make art accessible to the people. And then there was his capacity to visualize and to scale up the kernel of an idea into something that left you amazed. Two examples of this kind of scaling up are: one, the Mongolpuri Janotsav, that was developed from Sabda's idea of countering Apna Utsav, and the earlier exhibition of Vivan's drawings based on Pablo Neruda's poems, Heights of Machu Picchu, that traveled to DU and JNU. Hundreds of prints of Neruda and Karl Marx portraits from this exhibition were bought, priced at rupees 10 and each signed by Vivan. Almost all continue to be treasured by those who bought them in the days when resistance defined democracy. The SFI had planned to screen at DU October and Battleship Potemkin by Eisenstein. Vivan got a silk screen frame made and taught us how to design and print our own posters. Several other posters were also designed and printed by Vivan on that silk screen frame, including posters of a festival of Cuban cinema and the poster announcing the first conference of the Delhi University unit of the SFI. When the SFI at JNU started a weekly bulletin, it was Vivan who designed the masthead of the JNU SFI bulletin. One of my first experiences of art being used for a political campaign was again conceived, designed, and mounted on a van by Vivan, when we went around markets collecting funds, medicines, and clothes in support of people of Bangladesh. Vivan constantly commented on the larger question of politics through his works like the famous The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. Two paintings from this exhibition were bought by JNU. One Prabhat has already commented on, the golf course for the VCG Parthasarthi's office, and the tablecloth for the office of the registrar NVK Murthy. And who can forget the famous Mrs. G. After the lifting of the emergency, posters were painted calling for defeating the perpetrators of the emergency, and Vivan was an enthusiastic participant. It is this consistent involvement with the goings-on all around that made him join and actively work in the Committee for Communal Harmony and to mobilize artworks for an auction to raise funds for the campaign for communal harmony. It is during this campaign that both Safdar and I got to work with and know Vivan better, and that is how a little later, when Vivan was to take the lead in mobilizing artists in support of workers agitating for minimum wages. Though Vivan had first seen Safdar when the poster making workshop happened at our house, he now came to know him, and so when Safdar was killed in the attack on Janam in Sahibabad, Vivan was one of those who took the lead in the formation of Sehmat. Vivan continued to be deeply and actively involved in ideating, conceptualizing, and executing a large number of projects that have contributed immensely into making Sehmat into what it has become. The Artists Alert exhibition and the art auction that got us the corpus to run Sehmat were Vivan's ideas, as was the idea of asking prominent artists to illustrate Safdar's poems for children. Images and Words 1991-92, Postcards for Gandhi 1994, Gift for India 1997, Art on the Move 2001, Ways of Resisting 2002-2003, Forms of Activism 2014, and many others were all thought of and developed with Vivan playing a leading role in conceiving and executing them with untiring efforts. Vivan continued to contribute despite constantly aggravating arthritis. Vivan carried on attending Sehmat meetings without fail, attending the 1st January Safdar memorials across 3 decades and more. Vivan, we'll miss you. We'll miss your gentle presence, your determination, your dogged persistence, and your commitment to take art to the people, and above all, we'll miss your smile. Farewell, Vivan. There will not be another like you.
Ghulam Mohammed Sheikh, artist and Vivan's close friend for over 5 decades, could not be here today, but we will hear from him via recorded video message.
My dear Vivan, just as I returned home after leaving you at the crematorium, I realized you haven't left us. You seem to appear in the most unlikeliest of places I have been wandering about in Europe. Ever since 1961, you have remained a constant presence. So I refuse to believe you are not here. I first met you when you came to Baroda to study, when I just began teaching. You were 18 and I was 24. Not much of a difference. I recall you as the dashing young man with looks of an Alain Delon or an Aurier that the women folks in fine arts couldn't take their eyes off from. And how you whizzed about, past gasping onlookers on your two-wheeler, fantabulous, the first of its kind in Baroda. And yes, the La Boheme girl, Asha Putli on the pillion. I remember you in the painting studio working, frenziedly pouring oily liquid of black Japan, a la Jackson Pollock. Was it a premonition of your engine oil work at a later stage? Those were days of adventure when we journeyed to a mela after mela, and in Tarnetar we slept on the ground. Then when I was away in London, I heard stories of you and Bhupen having outraged the authorities after your brazenly erotic pop imagery. Then heard you had gone to the Slade School of Art as I was returning home. And there in London you had befriended that amazing maverick genius of an artist called Ron Kittai. In the summer of '69, when I landed at the commune you were staying in, I had this feeling that perhaps that haunt had started a churning in you, and that you had moved leftwards, and you had joined the students' protest movement 1968-69 that had swept Paris and London with the likes of Tariq Ali as leaders. My old friend Praful Dave, who was around, told me how you went behind bars for joining the agitation for a short period of time. Then you returned to India and literally jumped into the fray when the artist community of India had risen against the Lalit Kala Academy and joined also the boycott of the Triennale. Our friendship blossomed further when he proposed an exhibition of the works of Amrita Sher-Gil. And what a show it was. Those classic paintings now hanging in Shantiniketan were on the walls of Ravindra Bhavan, and Magh published a special number on her. But we were wondering why you had stopped making art during those days of your joining the left movement. But you soon emerged with that amazing series of drawings illustrating Pablo Neruda's long poem, The Heights of Machu Picchu. These triggered an inspiring project that poet Kamlesh and I thought of by publishing multinational edition of the poem in translation with those drawings. Unfortunately, that was not realized. You came bubbling with the idea of holding a graphic workshop in Baroda in 1973 to make works of art available to larger audiences. And I remember you took the exhibition of prints to a number of places with a missionary zeal. Artists of that period of time were somewhat like floating islands, and he proposed to join hands for a group exhibition that was in 1974. And 10 artists came together, and if I'm not mistaken, you showed that powerful portrait of Indira Gandhi rising like a spectre or a spectre of a of a dictator in that show held in Rajendra Bhavan. And then came days when Bhupen, Jogen, Sudhir, Nalini, Giv and I, with you, collectively protested against the triennial in 1978 in an exhibition called Six, who declined the triennial. After that came days and days when we gathered time and again at our residence in Baroda or yours in Delhi to constantly engage in long, deep, sometimes heated discussions about the role of politics in art. And have your argument that being apolitical was equally a political act and convinced many of us. Still again, in the days when 6 of us, oh no, 7 of us, with Geeta included, you, Bhupen, Nalini, Jogen, Sudhir and I, met at Bhupen's residence for a dream project of announcing ourselves in an exhibition Place for People sometime in 1979. As a mark of camaraderie, we invited Geeta to be the 7th participant in that exhibition for contributing an essay for the catalogue, and not based on our work. The exhibition left us bonding with each other in an unbreakable communion of sorts. For all of us, it served to be a watershed moment to chart out our own journeys. While I stayed in Baroda and you kept committing to apprise of the publication of Journal of Arts and Ideas and your future projects, then came the days when those terrific drawings and works in ink and engine oil after the invasion of Iraq swept us all off our feet. Perhaps there was a premonition of a calling you had by then to shut painting and drawing all together to chart an untrodden path of making installation. The multimedia installation of the Sher-Gil archive announced that in a somewhat uncharacteristically emotional manner. The intimate project of documents of an inherited personal history became more substantial with the digitally recast photographs of your incredible grandfather from Rao Singh Sher-Gil to reimagine personal memory into larger conversations of the time now and the time past. Perhaps it was a time when you seized the moment to embark upon larger issues. Your massive installation monument with its searing indictment of the culprits of the communal conflagrations in Mumbai after the demolition of Babri Masjid. And there your mind burnt with incessant fire, with a ceaseless energy to make your voice grow stronger and stronger in project after project. The epitome to my mind came when you camped in Kolkata for months to realize your most ambitious installation within the premises of the Victoria Memorial Hall to turn the legacy of that colonial edifice upside down. And then there were days and days when you came out with yet another stunning installation, each blazing a new trail. You marched after Safdar was assassinated and founded with the other artists collective called Sehmat. You then became its helmsman and anchor, devising incredible number of shows, taking the community of artists together, championing the cause of a multicultural and secular India. I remember when you came to Baroda to join the students' protests against the moral brigades, and how you set the minds of students afire by making them immerse in massive drawings and then making them erase all those drawings as an act of political protest. I also remember your enormous installation of videos and stills charting the emergence and disappearance of the ancient site of Muziris being drowned in the floods at the Kochi Muziris Biennale. And then it was difficult to keep a count of project after projects, videos and stills, your Gaka Baka, your spoof of the fashion industry. Every project was a kind of a new project for you and for the contemporary Indian art. Days after days, days after days, we were together as friends, comrades in arms, joining hands in collective projects, meeting privately to exchange ever changing worldviews, yet constantly, if passionately, remained engaged in the making of art. We chatted, we discussed, we agreed and disagreed, but never parted. We also dined and wined and laughed together. Where have all those days have gone, my dear Vivan?
Ashish Rajataksh, film theorist and a trustee of SSAF. Ashish.
Thank you. I remember literally the day when I first met Vivan and a lot of other people that evening. It was the opening night of the Place for People exhibition at the Jahangir Art Gallery, Mumbai. I was 23 then, and I was speaking to him as a journalist. I used to report for Sunday magazine in those days. I clearly had a lot of other things on my mind, however, when I was speaking to him, and as it transpired, so did he. Vivan was then just 37 and clearly at that time on a mission. There was a lot to do, and I was among the many who was pulled into what seemingly still was a world to win. We were in Bombay at the aftermath of the post-emergency years, and more immediately for us, the historic textile strike that was then at its peak. Vivan was moving feverishly through the city with Sudhir Patwardhan, making contact with the city's poets, its filmmakers and theatre people, in places as diverse as the Mumbai Marathi Grantha Sangrahalaya and the Bombay Union of Journalists. My main memory, as both he and Geeta gradually took me under their wing, introduced me to people they thought I should know, sent me to see things they thought I should see, adopted me, so to say, was that of being swept up by a cause, a purpose that my life had not had until then. There was a problem to be addressed, perhaps the most significant yet posed to a political aesthetic since independence, linked to ideologies propounded by a modernist cultural arts elite who had, it seemed at that time, worked out how to appropriate the languages of radicalism to sell commodified myths. State-appointed realism presented, even in 1981, the single biggest threat to significant radical revolutionary form. It was time to move on, to get something done. This then was the intellectual baggage that, together with an overnight hold-all, I brought with me the following year to Kasauli, when an invitation arrived for a conference and a workshop. Here I was, wide-eyed, at what seemed at the time to be a new kind of frontier, familiar and yet always a struggle. Much of what I remember at the time was a way to talk about art that I had not imagined possible. There were a lot of other people involved at that time. The idea really was to do radical aesthetic theory, to bring art to both the immediacy and the globe-fielding questions that political theory could still raise. How that could be done was, of course, another question entirely. There was Mihir Bhattacharya talking about Lenin and free theatre. There was Malini Unipta. There was Romi Khosla on what radical architecture to science might look like. There was G.P. Deshpande. There was, of course, Ghulam Sheikh. And there was Geeta talking about K.G. Subramaniam that day. And there was a discussion on the proposed journal, which has also been talked about earlier, the possibility of an exciting launch into the future with me, of all people, invited on board as a possible fellow traveler. 30 plus years on, it is astonishing how much it is the insignificant detail that, as much as the big picture, sticks in the mind. As the years have gone by, things have happened, workshops have taken place, exhibitions, talks, and even an astonishing artwork. Alongside all of them, interminable conversations about everything. We were apparently an advance guard for a condition of possibility. We could confide in each other about our weaknesses and our problems, but it would be between ourselves. Arts and ideas would do what somehow had not yet happened. For all our achievements after independence, it seemed that we had not yet in this country produced an aesthetic theory for the contemporary, where theatre, music, dance, film, and the visual arts would come together, not, importantly, under the aegis of the nation, but independently of it. That work continues. There were storms in Kasauli that summer. There was thunder and there was hail. The bolt of lightning that summed it all up. Life changed after that. Choices were made. Thank you. That was my presentation. I have, in addition to that, also been asked to do a short presentation of what you're about to see now, a compilation simply titled VIVAN, which we will now look at. It is perhaps arguable that from Vivan's student years on, and especially from London in the late 1960s, Vivan had been involved in a lot of things apart from the visual arts, in media, specifically film, later video, and of course we know all the way through to the present, digital practices, alongside a host of materials, including famously waste garbage and fiber optic cables. As you may have seen outside in the foyer, we have a reconstruction of a talk Vivan gave in March 2018 titled Time is on My Side, with his own voiceover put together by Babu Ishwar Prasad. What we are about to see now opens up Vivan both on and in film. His own experiments in the moving image, as well as his collaborations with a lot of filmmakers, including crucially Arun Khopkar, Ranjan Palit, R.V. Ramani, and perhaps most consistently Avijit Mukul Kishore, who shot 4 of his works, Tracking, Turning, Gagavaka, and the Insurrection Project, who has put together this compilation and who I'm delighted to say is with us today. It is a spontaneously produced assemblage of the rich moving image archive that we at SSAF are in the process of putting together. Presenting Vivan, a 20-minute edit by Avijit Mukul Kishore.
Sorry. Okay, so basically what I'd like to have a conversation with you about is your own journey as an artist, but also very importantly, the importance of collectivity, the relationship to...
Not all very dirty. गीता सिंह तुम्हारा जैकेट बड़ा गंदा है.
नहीं दिखता नहीं है.
सब ये white
नहीं दिख रहा.
Suddenly I'm getting very finicky. No, don't care. तुम्हारे बाल भी सीधे नहीं है, उसको सीधा करना.
No, it's not showing up, so don't worry.
तुम्हारे वो जिसमें दांत नहीं है वो भी देखेंगे. कितनी चीज
है, बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम. And we can change languages along the way. So there are some things which have to be said in Hindi also. So please feel...
I'm a monosyllabic, monolingual.
Yeah, well, I went to art school in Baroda, which I was really frightened to go to because having lived my entire life in literally North India, from Delhi to Simla, colonial India, that upper class India, that the act of going there, I think, was both traumatic but tremendously exciting, and it opened out an enormous social world. My roommate in Jivraj Mehta hostel was a wonderful Arjun Bhimani, a peasant from Saurashtra. And I think that those personal encounters and the kinds of students in Baroda opened me out to people and views, of course the artists, which I will mention. But I think it's that social environment was incredibly liberating. And then of course Baroda was a kind of incredibly advanced and liberated space. And if I go back to 61 when I joined Baroda, I mean, you know, everybody talks that when they were there it was the best years. But I think in certain objective ways it had already passed the first decade. And the 60s had brought about even the kind of changes that were taking place or were to manifest themselves in a more dominant way. That there were artists who were changing the art scene from the older generation of the progressive artists. And 2 names I'll take which really had an enormous impact on me. First of all, Jairam Patel, and then Himmat Shah. And I think that included very quickly my coming into contact
with students in the postgraduate in MA. And a year after I joined, there was Bhupen Khakhar who came. But I must say that the first really important opening to a whole new world of what an artist is came from Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, who was a student just a year before, but he was asked to take what was called the story of art or the history of art classes. And I mean, you know, he's a friend to this day, and almost immediately, you know, we struck up friendship, and the kind of environment of him being around well after the classes and sitting on the steps and reading Lorca. And so it was poetry, it was life, it was these different kinds of views that one encountered.
In 1980, I did a portrait of my father, a turning point in my work. There'd been considerable crisis, the crisis about bringing the human figure in. From that point, a series of paintings evolved, set the pattern which still exists today in the oil paintings that I'm doing. The desire to have as large a spectrum in terms of my subject matter, where I do allow the personal characters, friends of mine to be subject matter of painting, which has been the modernist movement, anathema. You don't paint your friends or your beloved or your family members. But the painting at the moment is a constructed artifact. It is something that I put together from this kind of long history that I have of this image or images that make the painting. Very large and important work for me. Again, a family painting, the Sher-Gil family from my mother's side.
VIVAN.
Painted it over 2 years. Took a lot out of me. In some way, the scale produced a certain formality, a certain kind of distance.
Well, I inherited the house Ivy Lodge from my mother, and when I had come back from England and went up to see her, she had sort of more or less moved there, didn't want to live here in this house, which she called a fortress. I found the lower outhouse, you know, mason working there. So I said, "Ma, why are you doing this? Because you got enough space here." And then she smiled and she said, "You know, when you don't get on with me, maybe your friends can come and be there and have a studio, so you'll spend more time here." So it was a little, whatever it is, some pre-thing that this house, beyond its physical, the main bungalow, the outhouses will come into use, so which they did. So in 75, when she died in Kasoli, I asked my father, I would like to start these workshops. So he was, you know, very open and benign person, and he more or less said, "This house didn't belong to me, it belonged to your mother, but it's nice you're asking me. And of course, you know, you must do what you want to do with it." So the idea of starting a summer workshop got into my head.
A rail track, the spine of the show. If, for Marx, the concept metaphor for history was the locomotive, then we cannot forget Walter Benjamin's sardonic afternote. History is not so much a train ride, but grabbing the emergency brake. The spatial factor in the installation is paramount. The way the body experiences the artifact as physical obstruction and material sign. A barricade, a warehouse, a short history of labor. To prise open the imperial image, there is a double take on reproduction techniques. The work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction has entered the phase when the photocopy is the work of art.
That your lens sort of gets another, shall we say, fracture, or it suddenly perceives that something else has to kind of appear, and that that it's, you know, got sort of some elements which you kind of are open to see in another medium that could prise open and take forward or reposition itself away from painting and narrative and telling stories to a much more intuitive relationship to material. I mean, I'd like to say that, you know, there are aspects of the pictorial, of things, you know, I mean, they continue in various ways. But yes, as oil painting, as easel painting, you know, that part came to an end. And as I said, that it resurfaces in very different ways, like in the trash work, which, you know, for me became a kind of statement about color, laying this whole cityscape was like doing a big mural on the ground, you know.
Yeah, so this is the Santhal family, and you can see there it's almost 8, 9 feet, 10 feet high. The different. And this is the milk hall. Okay. So this aspect of size, it's almost 9, 10 feet big, and the energy and the movement of it. So these are two remarkable, iconic figures of modern Indian art, of sculpture, which never attempted before. This is really early 38. And so, in approaching this work, I decided that I will, make it of terracotta, and creating a kind of huge numbers of them now together. So the peasant and the worker have sort of now become one.
ওরে মাটির ভিতরে হবে ঘর রে মন আমার কেন বাঁধো দালান।
So this is my great army, the Santhal family in Milkowai. The fact that they are workers and the congregation, of course, makes it a force, and so it could look like any march, is making a statement. But they are also marching with a great sense of abandon, movement. So I intentionally, made them be in this angle, that angle, some coming down the step, and a few even turning back, like they're going the other way. So
मैं एक कलाकार और इंसान सामाजिक मुद्दे को कला के जरिए अभिव्यक्त करने के लिए कमिटमेंट और नई लैंग्वेज चाहिए।
मैं कलाकार हूँ, कोई राजनेता नहीं। एक कलाकार चित्रकारी करता है, मूर्तियां बनाता है। अगर मुझे देश के लिए सेवा करना है तो मैं इसी तरीके से करूँ। देखो, मैं अभी कैसे अपने उद्देश्य की भाषा को पलट देता हूं और उसे विस्थापित करता हूं, मिलाता और भून देता हूं, बेचैन और अशांत करता हूं, विशाल के बीच एक स्थान बनाता हूं। क्यूबिस्ट, एक्सप्रेशनिस्ट, रियलिस्ट, एक ड्रीमर, एक रोमांटिक, एक एक्टिविस्ट, अलग अलग जबान में बोलने वाला। मैं आपकी भाषा को लगातार बदलाव के बहाव में डालने आया हूं, उसे अपना बनाने आया हूं। जब भी मैं पेंट करता हूं या स्कल्प्ट करता हूं, बार बार मुझे यह एहसास होता है कि मुझे इंडिपेंडेंट होना चाहिए, संपूर्ण स्वाधीन। किसी एक खास किस्म की स्कूल के अनुयायी बनकर या किसी और के जैसे काम कर मैं कभी भी एक खास कलाकार के रूप में अपनी पहचान नहीं बना पाऊंगा।
now this is my Santhal family, and it's kind of almost ready to go, and basically taking wood as a material for the Santhal family. Whereas, as you know, for milk call, I have taken all parts of a motor car, exhaust, etc.
last shot, please show Vivan.
Yes.
Because he made a portrait of his own father once. And
in that chair, by the way.
Yeah, in that chair.
In
Yes,
that chair.
in that chair. But today you're sitting in this chair, and the last little place where you are just silently just sort of in there, there's an amazing... But I mean, he's in a garden, you are in a junkyard, but it just works.
Many people say, as I get older, I look more and more like my father.
Yeah.
And I remember when I did that portrait of my father, when Giv Patel saw it, he said, when you can paint a portrait of your father like that, you have come of age.
Thank you so much, Mukul, for putting this together in such little time. I'd like to invite Rubina Karode to speak next. She's the Director and Chief Curator of the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art.
Thank you. Feels unreal having to speak after seeing Vivan speak. Mourning is a profoundly paradoxical attempt, a precarious act often bound to fail. Preserving or remembering is required for mourning as much as letting go and releasing. If we had forgotten him, how would we grieve for a dear friend? If we insist that he remain with us, how could mourning do its work? Vivan Sundaram traversed numerous lives and many adventures, personal, political, and art historical. Lifetime companion to his love, Geeta Kapoor, and camaraderie with numerous friends and fellow artists across disciplines, younger artists and students, he influenced and inflected many existences and ideas, alternative spaces and collectives, through the provocative force of his presence as an artist, activist, interlocutor, dissenter, and mentor. Yet his striving seemed singular. It belonged to none. Or perhaps it belonged to only those who remained banished from history or to the ruined lives of our political present. Also, the melancholy of his illustrious family, the subsequent deaths of his loved ones, marked his artistic practice with obsessive attempts at retrieval and reconstruction of personal history through memory and archives, often through objects, letters, and photographs. The mystery of the inaccessible was brought in via metaphors of the closed suitcase, cabinets, and trunks, photographs buried under transparent sheets and layers, or via the dispersing image. This was predominant in his two-part retrospective of 5 long decades held at the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art in 2018. Remembering Vivan and grappling with how he himself would have looked at the question of death and finitude, one is immediately taken to how remembrance and mourning shaped one of his most poignant works, the multi-part cenotaph memorial in 1993, as a fully realized installation project and a response to the aftermath of the Babri Masjid demolition and subsequent communal riots. At the center of the created labyrinth was the monochrome photograph of a nameless riot victim slain in the streets of Mumbai near a garbage dump. Instead of accepting the failure of history to properly mourn the deceased, Vivan took on the empathetic task of giving him a just burial and rescuing his death from the unfolding public amnesia. The brutal materiality of death is hammered in by the manner in which the photograph of the victim is pierced by rusty nails, bringing to fore the fact of mortality as well as the inescapability of memory, the great loss to the democratic ethos of the country. This heavy undertaking was aligned to what a young Nietzsche had to say about the act of mourning, in that undergoing a great loss makes it impossible to forget, and on the contrary, we try to bring this loss before the eyes of our soul as often as possible, as though by this frequent recounting to draw considerable consolation for our pain. Perhaps no one was more haunted by the specter of death than Vivan, and perturbed by the rending of the secular fabric of the nation state. Mourning consists in accepting that the departed are now only in us, now only images for us. Yet it is also about admitting the failure in interiorizing the other. Every mournful image, especially when is engraved by light, like the photograph of the fallen mortal, contains a surplus of meaning, irreducible to the silence and darkness of death. The image is withdrawn from the prosaic world of living because it now exists only in the intangible realm of memory and also one of imagination. Vivan deeply understood this profound paradox of the mournful image, its existence within a liminal space beyond, as well as inside our mediums of representation, occupying a place of retention as well as of imagination. Similar to the works from the Sher-Gil series, The Fallen Mortal appears to be a poetic affirmation of the last traces of life in one's engraving or entombment into an image, the afterlife of memory against power as a creative struggle against forgetting. When I utter Vivan, it is definitely him whom I appeal to, Vivan, the man beyond his name. However, since he himself is now inaccessible to this nomination, unresponsive to our interpellations, it is him in all of us that I name. And it is that interstitial space from where Vivan now affirms the power of the image, his own power to traverse and inflict our lives. Thank you.
We'll hear next via a recorded message from Tapati Guha Thakurta, historian and the former director of the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta.
I'm sorry I cannot be part of this gathering for Vivan this evening. As must be true with all of you gathered here today to honor Vivan, it's impossible to think of a person like him in the past or absent tense. The memory that returns to me most compellingly at this moment is of the making of Journey Towards Freedom, one of Vivan's most ambitious installations that he set up in 1998 inside the Darbar Hall of Calcutta's Victoria Memorial Hall. The radical upturning of that magisterial space, which we saw happening stage by stage, with nothing less than a railway track and a train carriage brought inside, along with a collage of objects ranging from a famous four-poster bed to piled up jute gunny bags or rows and rows of fabricated spines of books. All of this left an indelible imprint in the mindscape of the city. It is a mark of its resilient afterlife that the visual scape of this temporary installation refuses to get eclipsed even 25 years later. There was a very special Vivan that we in Calcutta came to know in the heady build-up to this project. By we, I'm referring here not to an artistic community necessarily, but more to an academic fraternity, mainly of the Center for Studies in Social Sciences and Jawahar University. Vivan made this city his home for months on end during 1997-98, as he set out to understand Bengal's difficult history of colonialism, nationalism, independence, and not least of all, partition. One of the most endearing recollections that I have of him is a Vivan clad in his trademark kurta and pajama, shouldering a large bag filled with notepads and books, regularly coming over from the Ramakrishna Mission in Gulbarga, where he was staying, to the archives of our center at 10 Dictates. We at the center would lovingly refer to Vivan as our visiting fellow, who was researching Bengal's history with the kind of diligence and passion that put most of our faculty and students to shame. Our greatest takeaway from this time was the carryover of Vivan's research from library and archives during the day into extended evening sessions of Adda at many of our homes. What was a lesson to all of us was the extraordinary intellectual humility and the eagerness to learn of this exceptional artist, whom Gita calls the artist among historians, this artist outsider to Bengal, who ended up becoming one of us in the deepest sense of the term. And Vivan in turn drew us all deep into his project in a way that made us radically rethink the nature of artistic and intellectual collaborative work. This wonderful sense of camaraderie returned again, fleetingly, in November 2017, when 2 decades after the installation, we gathered again at 10 Lake Terrace in Calcutta with Vivan, Gita, and Indu Aktalika books to mark the release of the History Project and to relive that time, not just in Vivan's artistic career, but even in the history of our own lives.
Next, I'd like to invite Yasufumi Nakamori, Senior Curator of International Art Photography at the Tate Modern in London.
Good evening. I am very humbled to speak this evening among very distinguished friends and colleagues of VIVAN. I'm Yasufumi Nakamori, the Senior Curator of International Art at the Tate. I'm here to represent Tate Modern, to show our respect to VIVAN, and convey our deepest condolences to Gita, their family and friends. Personally, I had a great privilege to come to know VIVAN by serving as a jury chair for the Umrao Singh Sher-Gil Grant for Photography in 2017. While VIVAN was fighting for his life in late March, at Tate Modern, we were installing his monumental work, Memorial. His exhibition opened to the public 2 weeks ago, on Monday, April 3rd, only 5 days after his passing. Memorial entered the Tate collection in 2019 after many years of research by curators and directors, especially Nada Raza and Francis Morris. It was made possible only with VIVAN's vision and the enthusiastic support from numerous funders for Tate. The opening of the display was a culmination of several years of planning by VIVAN and Tate curators, including Michael Raymond, Val Lavaglia, and Beatrice Cifuentes Feliciano. VIVAN, Gita, and Devika Dolet-Sin worked remotely through Zoom with our curators and installers on site to create this magnificent installation, with VIVAN deciding where to locate each component of work in Tate Modern's tank gallery so that the display is true to his ambition and vision for the work. We are grateful to VIVAN, of course, Gita and Devika, and all others for their diligent and passionate work at this most difficult time, which made a display of Memorial at Tate Modern possible. Next slide, please. In a few minutes, I want to walk you through Memorial as installed at the tank. Tank is Tate's most unique gallery, a raw concrete industrial subterranean space measuring over 30 meters across and 7 meters high. A really fitting space in which to present the powerful presentations of Memorial. I personally think this installation, Memorial, is the strongest display in this particular gallery space I have experienced in the last 5 years with the critical contents of the work and also contemporary relevancy of the work amplified by the space and the lighting. Next slide, please. Memorial is laid out like an architectural plan that recalls the landscape. The visitor enters Memorial through an industrial steel barrier, a maze-like structure of crisscrossed metal bars. At the opposite end of the room is Gateway, an imposing structure made of stacked metal trunks with a neon sign above bearing with the words, Falling Motel. A pathway made of red sandstone tiles connects the two structures to the central element, mausoleum, pyramidal structures formed by a pitched marble slab and glass panels. Next slide, please. Encasing a life-size plaster cast of a supine body of unknown victim in the Bombay riots. Next slide, please. Dispersed within the installation, manipulated and collaged photographs and objects inspired by the source photograph by photojournalist Hoshi Rao. Next slide, please. The images become progressively more abstract, yet more violent, disgrading the original image with the metal nails piercing the surface in ever closer grid patterns of piled on in wreath and abstract shapes. Next slide, please. Hang on the walls or encased within the large between cases. These works contain variations on the cenotaph for the unknown fallen civilian, made with a simple materials such as plaster, paper, steel, and iron nails. Bearing individual titles such as Iron Power and Protecting the Dead, they reference different forms of venerations and commemoration for the dead. Next slide, please. The visitor will see a structure that bears a black and white inlaid stone designed inspired by Soviet constructivist motifs, homage to VIVAN's interesting socialist movement and also aesthetics, in particular here at Hatlin's Tower. Next slide, please. The visitor will see a large freestanding metal and photographic construction, gun carriage, and the sculpture of the enlarged photograph pierced with a tower and metal stake. As you have seen, Memorial is distinctive for its use of photograph as a sculptural material. Vivan worked on his source image in multiple ways, using it as both a central visual metaphor and sculptural support and surface. While Benjamin suggested that photographic and reproducible technologies would reduce the aura of the original image, rendering it accessible yet diluted, here the image is reproduced again and again, and obsessively reworked until it acquires a heightened presence. As a whole, the work raises questions about collective memory and the changing nature of citizenship as post-colonial nationalisms mature in South Asia and elsewhere. Next slide, please. Memorial stands as a reminder of a single historical moment transformed into a symbolic space that grapples with the wider questions around mortality, violence, and representation that have resonated in modern and contemporary art and society in the last century. So we invite all of you here tonight to to think about VIVAN and hopefully visit Tate Modern and experience this monumental work before it comes down on the 3rd of September. Memorial is one of many important legacies VIVAN has left, and it will leave a powerful impact on countless visitors in generations to come. Thank you.
Our final speaker for this evening is Anuradha Kapoor, theatre maker and teacher and a trustee of the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation.
In this tribute to VIVAN, my dearly loved brother, I take a moment to recount some profoundly affecting things he taught me via his own practice about my practice of theatre making. Two among them are being resolute about a certain method, that is, collaboration, and as a parallel to that, faith in the slow time of theatre making and making projects. VIVAN gently shifted my ideas about collaborating and combining disparate, sometimes antagonistic people and elements. And while watching him, I understood the importance of being ready to wait in slow time for things to shape, reshape, or fall apart, even while being committed to the process and urging it with affirmative energy. In 2015, VIVAN worked on a project called 409 Ram Kinkars. In that, VIVAN set up a performance in the lawns of IGNCA, where his sculptures, objects, and sculptural citations of Ram Kinkar's work were laid out in an acre of space. A group of historians, writers, actors, academics, artists worked to map the play on the landscape. Performers crisscrossed the space, sometimes telling stories, sometimes being part of a dialogue, sometimes mobilizing the artwork and carrying it across the space. The project was about horizontality. Spatially, objects, actors, sound was experienced laterally, laid side by side on the same plane, but also because the text itself was non-linear. All expressive means, therefore, were non-hierarchical in their positioning, not stacked up to form a pyramid, not plotted as an escalated narrative leading to a conclusion. VIVAN's conceptualizing of the RKB project as a means to distribute authorship became for me a means of understanding that collaboration can be both form and method. I speak now of space and Ivy Lodge. Already in the 1980s, VIVAN's wide vision sought to reconstruct Ivy Lodge Kasoli to materially felicitate collaboration. Discussing and reading on the dining table, rehearsing and debating in the pit below, working in the studios or devising collectively on the hillside, dialoguing on the slope, or writing in the midst of all this on a bench. A corporeal existence and experience of groupness where the artistic and the political outcomes are seen as deriving from methods of group interaction and collective impulses. Notwithstanding disagreements and agons and friendly animosities, this groupness, I later understood, could even be read as a sort of polemic in action against prior methodologies of individual making. Now and then. When theatre work happened in Kasoli, VIVAN found solutions to problems that arose in the rehearsals in ways that were in between the now and the then, between this instance and the long-term future. If the space needed alteration, fabricating steps, slinging wires, activating taps, replastering tracks, this was immediately done. not only towards making the performance at hand possible, but for making the space hospitable for the future. What will this tree look like when it has shed its leaves? What time will this sequence happen in the summer when the evenings are long, or in October when dusk falls rapidly? What changes to the atmosphere will the seasons bring, and how will this come into the playmaking? This working between now and then, the present and the future, gives theatre a long, even if entirely imaginary life. Futures, slow time, long projects. In 2016, when the Cantonment Board of Kosolio objected to the concrete roof that had been constructed over the outhouses, VIVAN decided to make the demolition called for by the authorities into a performance. You have seen Ramani's film on that action. On the mounds of rubble that the slab created, VIVAN started planning simultaneously a resurrection of that space. In place of the rubble, an interior theatre. On the gaping grids, a roof, a removable theatre looking into the valley. Terraces that provide different angles of view of the mountains and the valley, afford a place to read, make work, perform action, shout across, debate and dispute. Common dining spaces to continue the talk over a meal, some small gardens edged with flowers. Mapped on the old Ivy Lodge, its pit and stage and outhouses, a new Ivy Lodge has emerged. A new space that attempts once again to imagine collective energies materialize non-stop dialogue and collegiality. The new Ivy Lodge will be ready in 1 month. Thank you.